the Pharisee and the tax collector. Both come to the temple. And in the true pattern of the parables of Jesus, all the assumptions that would have been made about which one should be favored are turned inside out. Everyone listening to this parable would have assumed, of course, the Pharisee, this righteous man who pays his tithes, who fasts, who does everything right, he must be the one that has God's favor. This tax collector, well, who is he? He's betrayed his people. He's working for the colonial power that has invaded his community. He's worthless. And yet, the dispositions of their hearts reflect something very different. When the Pharisee prays, he gives thanks to God that he is not like the others. He gives thanks to God for the perfect things that he does. The tax collector recognizes his profound dependency in God. That without God's mercy, he can do nothing. How often do we find ourselves, usually unintentionally, being the Pharisee? I think it's human nature to kind of look at the people around us, and it's why gossip sometimes is so fun and affirming, because we get to push others down to keep our own head above water. We say, well, at least I'm not like her, I'm not like him, my kids aren't like that. Any little thing that we can grasp onto to say, maybe I do have value and worth. The challenge in that reality is oftentimes when we're the ones asserting most strongly our goodness against the other, we're often the ones struggling the most to truly find value in ourselves. Because if we truly trusted that I live in God's mercy, I am loved by God, I am his beloved child, then why would your external appearance matter to my sense of value? Why would I need you to be less than me? But we all pass those judgments, each and every day. And we make whole assumptions about each other and about the world based on just little facets of our lives that we see. And it's very easy to see where we've been wronged, and often very hard to own where we have hurt others. When I was in seminary in Chicago, lived on the south side of Chicago in Hyde Park. Hyde Park's a very diverse neighborhood, a very gentrified neighborhood around the University of Chicago. But the communities that surrounded Hyde Park were quite poor. It's kind of reputation of the South Side ghetto. So one day I was walking from our house somewhere in the neighborhood, and a group of youth were passing me on the street. For some reason, I felt fearful. I felt afraid. I felt like I shouldn't be near them. They didn't do anything to me. I had no idea who they were. They were minding their own business and they went on their way. Then a few days later, it happened again. And I thought, what is this about? Why am I feeling discomfort toward someone that I don't even know? There's no reason for it. And it happened again. And I had some very deep, honest conversations with myself about why I felt this desire to push these kids away. What they all had in common was their race. They were all African American youth. And for reasons of which I do not know to this day, the sight of them instilled fear in me. And it had nothing to do with them. They were high school kids, minding their own business, living their lives. But there was a prejudice in me, a judgment in me, something in me that wanted to reject them. And that made me deeply uncomfortable. When I had to look at that in myself and say, why? Why am I like this? Then I had to start understanding something different about myself. To recognize that as enlightened and educated and inclusive as I perceived myself to be, I still carried prejudice and darkness and judgment. And so I embarked upon this little internal mission in which, in my free time, I would spend as much time as I could in the neighborhoods that surrounded us. I'd go and try to have lunch, try to do my shopping, try to just walk the streets. And I did it over and over again until that sense of the fear of the other, someone who looked different than me, began to fade away. But I think the core to what that is, the core to what it is that makes us come to truly love and accept the people that surround us for who they are, not for what we project on them to be, is when we come to understand ourselves. When we recognize our own brokenness, our own frailty, our own dependence, our own need for God's mercy. When we can find ourselves in the temple beating our breasts and saying, God, have mercy on me, a sinner. When we can have the honesty to face our sin, when we can have the honesty to face our judgment, when we can have the honesty to face the things that cut us off from those who surround us, then God's love begins to move in our lives. Every time we look upon someone we know well or someone we don't know at all, and we pass judgments about their value, is an opportunity in which we lose the capacity to know God present in our midst. Because if we're honest with ourselves and we realize that God moves most powerfully in our own personal poverties and brokenness and shadows, in those moments where it's not about what we can do, but what we need God to do in us, then oftentimes the very things that we like to push someone else down for is what God can use to teach us about himself. So when we look upon other people and pass judgments because of their race or their gender or their sexual orientation or their disabilities or their age, when we're fearful of others because they might have a mental health diagnosis, when we're fearful of each other because of any one thing that we don't truly understand, we don't just cut ourselves off from our family, our friends, or our neighbor. We cut ourselves off from God. But as challenging as it is to walk into those spaces where we don't just acknowledge where we've been wrong or we've been hurt or people have pushed us away, but where we've done it ourselves, then the grace that can be born is unimaginable. Because it's in those spaces that we trust. If I'm a beloved child of God and His mercy has poured upon me in my unworthiness, then how much more it must be in your life and in yours, and in everyone's life gathered here. And that becomes the challenge, the call, and the grace. To have the vulnerability in our trust in God to step across the perceptions we make based on what we think we control, and allow God to show us what He does. So as a community of faith, let us continue to walk not only with each other, but with the world that surrounds us, acknowledging all of our need for God's mercy, not as a point of condemnation, but as an invitation.